Well, extremely high levels of poverty remain a huge issue in the Eastern Cape. In some areas, entire communities are struggling to get by on a daily basis. Data shows unemployment levels in rural areas are significantly higher than the provincial average. Experts say a large number of people below the breadline also miss out on the social safety net because they are undocumented. Now, let's discuss this. Sandy Bukula, CEO of Operation Hunger, joins us now. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon. I mean, this is a very tragic story in the Eastern Cape, but because of the work that you do in that province particularly, I'm sure it didn't come as a surprise.
It definitely didn't come as a surprise, Onachi. It was such a tragic story to hear, and condolences to the family. The Eastern Cape is not different, though, to any of the other rural communities across the country, because basically the levels of acute food insecurities are very high. And I think basically because of the COVID-19, the climate change, as well as load shedding over the past, they are so, they are basically faced with so many determinants that, that are enforcing them to be in destitute. Basically in the last quarter, we had profiled the nutrition surveillance for the Eastern Cape. And what we found was about 61% of that province of the population is dependent on social grants, and 47.9% of people that are employed, but 20% of that accounts for unskilled labor. So you can only imagine that basically the income around those households are below, 2,000 Rand. And you know that, the food basket has increased this year tremendously. I mean, we're talking about, for a family to afford to provide for dietary requirements just alone, you need at least about 5,091 cents. And this has increased dramatically from the previous year, because I think it was by 7%. So you can only imagine the current inflation and the soaring of prices, how it's impacting these communities. Now, I'd like also to add, we've seen basically an increase in the trend during the period of the load shedding, because I think with water supply and bulk water supply as well, we find that, even the coping strategies that basically rural residents use as, like part of farming, subsistence farming, aren't necessarily working at the moment due to no water at all. And the province basically faces a huge amount of drought. So it's an underlying issue of complexities around around the population of the Eastern Cape, but it's not very much different, from all the other rural communities that we're finding in the country.
So, Sandy, I mean, with all that you have said, and of course, taking into consideration that you've seen a change in trend, post COVID-19, as well as now during load shedding, surely then the systems that are in place, particularly from government, should be changing. Because, I mean, I know with this particular, situation or incident in the Eastern Cape, the Social Development Department is calling on community members to call for help from government. But if they are already providing some form of assistance, through food packs, which probably are not enough, if anything goes by with your stats, that they would need at least about 5,000 rands to survive a month. Surely then we should be changing the way in which we are supporting and helping South Africans.
100%. I think our plight towards policy change and advocacy over the past year has been looking at integrating, or not only just looking at relief aid, but actually starting to look at driving economic development, especially within the rural communities. There are currently opportunities where we can look at, for example, the current food system, but that cannot happen if the infrastructure isn't basically looked at. So, there are a couple of complexities really. And if you're just thinking really along Eastern Cape, I mean, transportation, for example, is such a big issue. And I don't see any movement really in government besides just the domestic investment, where they are actually waiting for the overall budget that is provided by national government, over in the beginning of the year. There isn't really much a drive within looking at at other, innovative measure on how we can drive investment in terms of developing rural communities and ensuring that the livelihoods are protected. Because I think, for example, when we count in South Africa and we're counting just looking at what type of aid we're providing for social protection, we're only looking at the SASSA grant. However, if you think about the SASSA grant, the maximum for a child, I think is at the moment about 500 Rand. I stand to be corrected because there's different, of course, categories depending on the beneficiaries. And if you're looking basically just at the requirement for a child per month that is required, and this varies between children between 3 to 9 years, and also just looking at, adolescent children, you need at least about 978 just to provide for one child. So you can only think about, if you only think about the type of income and the income distribution that comes in the home. So if you're only having a social grant, you still have to basically pay for school fees, all of those kind of things. So basically groceries and, and food condiments always are compromised because you have other security issues that are pressing, for homes. I'd like to also add, because, with what we've seen in the downturn with the economy as the impact of COVID-19, but we're also seeing now, together with the trend of the climate change as well as the inflation tree at the moment. So what we're seeing also is the number of people that are being added that are without jobs and employment. So this leaves really, families to basically share, like the basic minimum of that income. So, for example, if you had the social grant that was supposed to only look at the elderly, that basically has to now be split amongst several family members in order to keep alive. And because the resources are so stretched at the moment.
Sandy, thank you for painting that picture. But very quickly, in terms of, of course, looking at solutions. I mean, you are but one organization. We spoke to other organizations too, who say they also have done, significant progress in the Eastern Cape, but there's still a lot to be done. I mean, when you see that government underspends in this particular area, particularly in the Eastern Cape, what must happen? We know that in 2022, I stand under correction, over 180 million Rand was not used for food packs, as an example, for urgent relief in that province. So where does accountability lie, and where do you step in as an organization?
So we have basically several areas, because we provide for relief, because we can't chase people away. And basically our model looks at integrating those specific beneficiaries into, integrated projects that are commercially viable to create jobs as well as, to create social income. But I think the biggest impediment, for most NPOs such as ourselves is that, without actually having the actual deliberate, deliberate action by government in terms of looking at infrastructural change, because those things do impact and are part of determinants of driving service within the rural community. So what it would cost for us to provide relief within the urban areas, because there's a little bit of infrastructure here and there. It drastically increases the cost of driving service within those specific communities. So you definitely need to have government act faster, especially when it comes to infrastructural development and enterprise development within rural communities.